Hello again, as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. Today's class is PHP Syntax and Errors. This class continues our PHP programming track. So before we start diving into PHP programming, we have to talk about how you speak in the PHP programming language. There are some very specific things that you have to understand in order to be able to program in PHP. These are basic things like the equivalent of grammar in the English language, such as, you need a noun and a verb and a period in order to make a sentence. If you understand those things, then you can get off to the more complicated stuff. So this class, we're going to go over the basic syntax of how you create a PHP script and specific little things that you need to make sure that you do in order to make sure that the PHP script works. Whether you are writing a script that is 1 line of code or 50 lines of code or 5,000 lines of code, what we're going to talk about today will stay true through all of that. We are also going to talk about formatting and viewing formatted text when you write out text in PHP. It's not a complicated subject, but it is a subject that throws people off sometimes. People many times forget that text, when it is formatted to be read with a text editor, such as Notepad or Notepad++, will look different than when it is formatted to be read by something like a web browser, such as Firefox, Google Chrome, or Internet Explorer. So we will also go over that in this class. These are basic concepts that you really have to understand. If you understand these, your life is going to go much better in the PHP programming world, and if you can't get this stuff through your head, then it's just going to go be a miserable, horrible experience, and you should give up now, really. So as you know, I'm Eli the Computer Guy. This class is PHP Syntax and Errors. If you give me a second, we'll dive right in. So the first thing we need to talk about is how you call a PHP script. Calling a script means running a script. So whenever you read programming stuff or you're watching videos like mine and I say I'm going to call a script, all that means is that you are going to run the script. You're going to make it run. In the PHP world, you need to call or run a script from a web browser, from Internet Explorer, from Firefox, from Chrome, etc. Basically, you are going to put the script in the address bar of that web browser, and that is what will make it run. So when I do the demonstration today, I will open up Google Chrome. I'll type in www.elithecomputerguy.com/test, which is the folder I have my script in, /test.php, and that will run the script. You can also run the scripts when they are called from web forms. So when we get further along in this track and I show you how to create forms for collecting information such as email addresses or names and such, when you hit submit, that will also be able to call the PHP script. So anything that is going to be using HTTP, Hypertext Transport Protocol, can call the PHP script. It's very important for you guys who know a little bit of Linux, a little more advanced in the IT world. You cannot simply call PHP scripts through something called cron jobs or just be able to run them at the command line. They always have to be run through the web browser through HTTP. So you either go to them, like I say, you will open up a web browser and you'll actually go to the script, or you'll have a form. When you hit submit, it will submit the information to a PHP script. However you do it, this gets run through that web interface. So the next thing to realize with PHP scripts is most of the time when you write PHP scripts, you will call the PHP script something.php. So what we're going to do today is test.php. The important thing to remember is this .php doesn't matter. You don't, in fact, need it. You can just call the file as test. You don't need .php. You don't need that file association that you know of in the Windows world. The issue with that, though, especially for you guys, is that you are new. Are you going to remember what test is? If you call it test.php, it doesn't matter to the computer, but it very well may matter to you. So I can go and I can say test.php. Oh, I know that's my test PHP script. Whereas if I just open up a file folder and I see test, well, then I may have all kinds of problems. I may just not know what this particular folder or this file is. The other issue you may run into if you are like me and you use Windows as your primary desktop computer for editing files and such, Windows doesn't like things without file associations. Again, they will still work, but it doesn't like it. So overall, I would tell you, make sure you just do it as test.php. The next thing I will remind you, if you have done the Linux track, is remember, you are uploading these files, these scripts, to web servers. Most people upload these files or scripts to Linux web servers. Now, what's a very important thing about Linux web servers that you have to be very, very, very careful about, especially in the programming and web programming world? Well, remember, in Linux, capitalization matters. So remember, if you're calling a script, or if you're trying to connect to a script or file in the Linux world, uppercase TEST is a different file than lowercase test.php. If you get sloppy, these files are different than uppercase T, lowercase est.php, etc. So remember, in the Linux world, this is one of the big errors that comes up, especially when you're new in programming, and especially when you're used to the Windows and Mac environment. In Windows and Mac, capitalization doesn't matter. TEST is the same as TEST, is the same as TEST in those worlds. In Linux, uppercase TEST is a different file than lowercase TEST, which is a different file than uppercase T, lowercase EST. These would all be different files. So if you created a script that's all uppercase TEST, and then you try to call it by linking to lowercase TEST, well, then the script will simply fail because this doesn't exist. This is the one that exists. So be careful with this. When you go into programming, when you start to read the programming books and you get into this, that is why it becomes very important that you come up with your own style of how you will be writing. Make sure that you always write file names the same. So when you save them up to the file server, what is saved to the file server will look exactly like what you're calling from your script. So for me, whenever I'm doing programming, I simply do lowercase everything, lowercase TEST. That's how I always do it. Therefore, I know there's no problems. So this is going to be one of the big things when you're dealing with PHP in the future, and especially when you're calling scripts, is remember that capitalization matters in the Linux world. So the first thing is you have to be able to call these Linux scripts from web browsers. Then remember that the .php file association doesn't really matter in Linux in the web server world. It does matter when you're trying to remember what it is. And then capitalization, for files, for folders, and so on, will cause you problems. It will cause you nasty, nasty, nasty problems. So now, once we've decided that we are creating a file called test.php, and so we're going to create this file as we are going to in the demonstration. So we create this file in Notepad++. Now the first thing that you have to do is you have to tell the file server that a PHP script is coming. You have to be able to tell it that what follows is a PHP script and not a JavaScript or not simply HTML coding. The way you do that is you do angle bracket question mark PHP. This opens the PHP script. What it says is what follows is PHP programming and not something else. You will then close the PHP script by doing question mark, angle bracket. So what this tells to the web server is that everything between these two is a PHP program. Everything else on the rest of the page might be something else, but everything here is a PHP program and to treat it as such. Then, once you have this, so this is your PHP program, says what's going to happen here, then you tell the PHP interpreter what to do. So in our demonstration, we are going to give it the print command. So the print command prints something to the screen of the web browser. So what we'll do is we'll do print space, quotation marks, hello, space, world, in quotation marks. So what that will say is it's going to say print, and then it says everything within the quotation marks. So you have to make sure you open quotation marks and then you close quotation marks. If you forget to close a quotation mark, then you're going to have problems, because then PHP is going to print everything until it finds another set of quotation marks to close the quotation marks. So in PHP, you have to make sure that you remember to open and to close whatever it is you're going to be doing. When you create the PHP script, you open the PHP script, and then at the end, you have to close the PHP script. If you're going to give a command, such as print, you have to open, so you open the quotation marks, and then you have to give it a closing quotation marks. So print, again, everything between these two things. And then finally, the basic thing that you have to understand with PHP programming is that the semicolon is the equivalent of a period in an English sentence. So whenever you tell the PHP script to do something, so I want it to do this, you then end that with a semicolon. That says, I want you to do this, and then once you have done that, go on to the next command. If you don't give the semicolon, then it's going to try to lump everything together. Kind of think like in English, you'll get some massive, horrible run-on sentence, and then nobody is going to be able to understand what's going on, just like an English sentence. So if you forget to put the semicolon, a whole bunch of nastiness can happen. These are the main things that you have to understand when you're doing PHP programming. They seem very, 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 very simple. But if you forget them, it's just horrible. It's just evil. I mean, it's just nasty. Computers don't think. If you don't give them the exact command, well, they're going to output the command you gave them. So this is very important. You can't be sloppy when you're programming. So with this, test.php, you open the PHP script, you give it a command, so print, or whatever you want to have done, add, divide, subtract something. Then, if you're doing print, the quotation marks, you open the quotation marks, say hello world, close the quotation marks, open, close. Whenever you open the door, you've got to close the door. And then, when you're finished giving a single command, then you do a semicolon that says that command is over, go to the next command. And then finally, you do the question mark, angle bracket, and that closes the PHP script. So when you call test.php from your web browser, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, whatever you use, the web server will read this, will read the file, it will then see the script, and then will then output the information, and there you go. That's all there is to it. Now with errors, a lot of people have already been asking me about errors. We haven't even got into programming yet, and people ask me about errors. Well, the nice thing with PHP programming is that the PHP server will provide you errors when you try to go to the web page and there is a problem. So everything here was done on different lines. So let's say this is line 1, 2, 3, right? So this is a text document. This is why I like using Notepad++, because it numbers the lines on the left-hand side. So if you forgot to do something like put a semicolon or such in here, when the PHP script tries to run, it will run into that problem, and then you'll get printed out on your web browser some kind of error in this file at line 2, And then you can go back and you can try to figure out what the error is. You can say, oh, I forgot a semicolon, or oops, I screwed up and I misspelled print. So when you go to the web page, if there's an error on the page, it will then actually tell you what that error is. The one problem that you may have with this is it will tell you where it sees the error. So as I will show you in the demonstration, the problem is when you open something, you have to close it. Well, sometimes how things get closed can cause big problems. So if you had one line that's print hello world and then print, I don't know, this is cool. So how this is supposed to be is print space, quotation mark, hello world, quotation mark, semicolon, print space, quotation mark, this is cool, quotation mark, semicolon, end. That's how it's supposed to be written. Well, you may run into problems. So if you forget to put the closing quotation mark here, when the PHP script runs, PHP is going to keep looking until it finds the closing, what it thinks is the closing quotation mark. So now instead of saying printing hello world, it's going to print hello world, semicolon, print, and that's where it's going to stop. It will then see this here as the error. And so if this is line, let's say 3 and 4, it will now say you have an error on line 3, because as far as it's concerned, this is the closing quotation mark, and all this gobbledygook is an error to it. So this is where you can have some quirks with the error that you get, is sometimes it's not specifically where you think it is going to be. So your error is actually here on line 2, but because of how PHP read your script, it thinks your error is on line 3. So just keep this in mind. If you keep these simple things in mind, PHP is very, 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 very easy. So we need to take a minute to talk about text formatting, because this can really throw new PHP programmers for a loop. Because remember, PHP is going to be writing out text information. So whenever you give it a command such as print hello world or tell it to print something to the web browser, it is going to print that out in standard text. The issue is that the web browser reads HTML. So if you print something else out in standard text and then you read it with an HTML web browser, it may not look how you think it should look. So this normally comes about with a command called next line in PHP. So I'm not going to go into the command, I'll show it to you in the demonstration. But essentially what happens is you can divide a sentence onto 2 different lines. So before we were talking about, let's say, hello world. This is what we want to say. This is what we want to have printed out on the web page. When we go to test.php with Firefox, we want to see hello world. Well, let's say we're just trying to be goofy. And what we want is we want hello on the first line and world on the second line, right? Doesn't seem too complicated. Well, what we would do is within the hello world string, we would add /n. So this says next line. Now here's the tricky part that you have to understand what's going on. So when we run this script, so when we run print hello world, what will happen is PHP is going to print hello on one line, then it sees this next line command, and it will then put world on the second line. So it'll put hello on the first line, world on the second line. But it's going to do that as text. This is very important to understand. Make sure you're following me. It's going to do this as text. Well, what do web browsers read? What do web browsers base their formatting off of? They base their formatting off of HTML tags. So what will happen is the PHP will print this in text, but then when the web browser views it, it doesn't see any tags, so it will return it on the same line within your web browser. So I'm going to show you this when we do the demonstration, but if you look at the source code for the web page, it will have hello and world in two different lines. But when you're viewing the web page within the web browser, it will put hello world onto the same line. The reason is because there's no HTML formatting here. So be very careful with this. I'll show you this, up there. Is remember that the web browsers are going to read HTML formatting. So once we get more into this PHP tract, I will show you how to write HTML on the fly with PHP. But just realize now what we're doing. PHP is printing out text. Your web browser is reading HTML. So with a text editor, this is what you would see, and with a web browser, this is what you will see. This causes people a lot of heartache and a lot of problems, so just make sure you understand this. So this is a theory on what we're doing. So we've talked about that you call the PHP script through the web browser. We've talked about making sure that the file names are the same, especially if you're using Linux servers. We've talked about the syntax, the error, and the formatting. Now to make sure that you really understand what's going on, let's go onto the computer and I will show you how all of this works in the real world. I think it will make a lot more sense to you. So here we are back on my Windows 7 computer, and I have Notepad++ open. Again, especially when you're doing simple PHP programming, really any simple programming, I think Notepad++ is the greatest thing in the world. You have a lot of little nice features such as the FTP client. It's completely free. You can download it. You can use it. Just go out and download and use Notepad++. It will make your life a lot easier than trying to simply use Notepad while you're trying to do this stuff. So the first thing that we need to do when we're creating a PHP script is we need to tell the web server that has the PHP interpreter installed on it that a PHP script is coming. We need to signal to the server that you need to use the PHP interpreter to run the program. So the way we do that is by opening the PHP script with angle bracket question mark PHP. This tells the web server that when somebody goes to this particular web page, that what follows is a PHP script and it should be interpreted as such. Then we're going to do a couple enters and we're going to close the PHP script. Within PHP, it's very important that you both open and close things. So just like with this PHP script, we have to open the PHP script and then we have to close the PHP script. If we forget to close the PHP script, then it is going to throw an error and it will not work properly. Now, once you've created this, so it says anything in this middle area is a PHP script. Now you can create your program. So the simplest program, the program that everybody always does since the dawn of computers, is to say hello world. So what we're going to do is we're going to type print. The print command tells the PHP interpreter to write whatever follows on the web browser screen. So we are going to print quotation marks hello world, close quotation marks. So again, we open the quotation marks here and then we close it here. Then as we talked about, the semicolon is the equivalent of a period in a sentence. So when you say a sentence with a subject and a verb, you end it with a period. In PHP, when you give a command, you end it with a semicolon. That tells the PHP interpreter this single command has finished. Now run the next command. So this is very important. And now this is what a PHP script looks like. So we have PHP, we have print, hello world, semicolon, then we close a PHP script. This is a full PHP script. So I can hit save. As I say, why I like Notepad++ is I can then just go over here and I can upload the file directly in Notepad++. We look down here, we can see it's been uploaded. I go to Google Chrome. You will see we're at www.elithecomputerguy.com/test/php.php. The main thing with PHP that you have to remember is that you can only run PHP scripts through a web browser or through something that is going to interact with HTTP. This runs through the web browser itself. So this isn't like a shell script where you can run it another way. You have to run this through web browsers, Internet Explorer, Firefox, etc. There is some quirk to that. You can play with that, but generally PHP scripts will only work through web browsers. So all we do is we hit refresh now, and look at that. Hello world. We have said the program, the words that every programmer always starts with. Hello world. From the beginning of time, beginning of computers, they've said hello world. And this is your first PHP program, and it really is that simple. So if we look back at Notepad++, we open the PHP, we tell PHP the program we want to run, so print hello world, semicolon, then we do question mark angle bracket closes PHP. We upload that to the server that has PHP installed on it, and now we get this fancy little application that says hello world. I want to show you what happens if you make a mistake. Again, I will try to hammer this home. If you make any little tiny stupid mistake in programming, most of the time the entire program doesn't run. Programming is exceedingly precise. To be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why I am a star IT guy and not a star programmer, is because I am not precise enough to create these really complicated programs. I understand the technology, I understand the concept, I'm smart enough to think of the programs, but for me, I'm horrible. I have butterfingers. I mean, it's horrible when I type. So if you have a problem, let's say you forget something. So you forget that to close these quotation marks here. So we're going to save, and then we're going to upload. So this is now uploaded to our web server. I'll hit refresh, and now we get an error. Parse error, syntax, unexpected home content. So the main thing that you have to look at here is where is the error, especially once we start getting into more complicated scripts that are using multiple PHP programs to operate. You have to make sure where the script is coming from. So we see that it's coming from test.php, and then this is one of the reasons why I like Notepad++. It says on line 7. So then we go over to Notepad++, and we look, and then we see, oops, it says on line 7 here. The reason it says on line 7 is because that is where the PHP script ends. Depending on how you do this, that error is more or less accurate. So right now you can see that all you know is somewhere in this PHP script you made a mistake. Well, let's say if we just completely screw up this command. We say PRIT instead of print. Let's save that. Let's upload that. And now we will refresh. And this is a little better for you. We get an error. Again, we see where the error is, test.php, and now it's on line 3. So now we can go and go 1, 2, 3. Oh, look at that. We messed up by not seeing print. That was the error. So the reason I like Notepad++ is because it gives you, one of the reasons is it numbers every single line. So when you're doing PHP code, most of the time the PHP code will give you an error and will more or less show you where the error is within the program. Sometimes, like I say, with that whole, you forgot the quotation mark, it may give you a weird number that doesn't seem to make any sense, and then you have to go back and look. But those are the errors for you. So now if I hit this and save and I upload, we go back and we should now see hello world. I want to show you one last final thing so that you understand something about PHP and HTML. PHP is going to print this out as text. So if you're using a text reader, you may see a different format than if you're using an HTML reader. The reason is because HTML uses specific tags for how text is formatted, if you know anything about HTML. So if you want to make a break in a line, you have to do angle bracket BR slash BR angle bracket, and that will make a break in the line. If you have text on two different lines, but there's no tag between them, HTML will put the text on the exact same line. This is one thing that can confuse people when they're printing things in PHP, especially to web browsers. So I'm going to show you something here. If you do backspace in this command right here is basically a line break. So what this tells to PHP is it says PHP print hello on one line, hit enter, and then put world on another line. So if I hit save and I hit upload, we are going to go over and we are going to go to hello world. So if you're not used to what's going on, when I hit refresh, you're going to expect hello to be on the top line and world to be on the second line. If we hit refresh though, we see that hello is on the top line and world is on the same line. We're like, wow, what's going on? And so we hit refresh. No, same, refresh. Well, that's weird. Well, the reason is because this is a web browser, and so it is expecting HTML tags. If I hit if I right click and I do view page source, I am now looking at the page's source code. So you can now see that hello is on the top line and world is on the line below it. So if I am looking at this text with a text reader, then hello, return world. That is what I see. But if I'm looking at it with a web browser, I see it all on one line. So this is very, very, very important when you're doing formatting. So if I wanted hello to be on the top line and world to be on the line below it, and to show that in HTML, I would have to do this and give it an HTML tag. So now I hit save, I hit upload, go back, and now hello is on the top line and world is on the second line. Why? Because the web browser is reading the HTML coding. Now if we go and we do view page source, the ironic thing here is now hello and world are still on the same line. So you have to think about this when you're programming in PHP. When you are printing out commands that are going to be read by some kind of text editor or text viewer, they may look different than if you're printing out commands that will be viewed by a web browser or something that reads HTML. Again, I know I've seen this with a lot of people learning programming. This just kind of blows their mind in the beginning. So if you don't explain it properly, it's all bad. But this is your first simple PHP program. So just angle bracket, question mark PHP, print, quotation mark, hello world, close quotation mark, semicolon, then close PHP, question mark, angle bracket. You then upload that to your web server, GoDaddy, 1&1, whoever you use, and I would suggest that at this point you simply name the file something like test.php. This file association, especially if you're on a Linux server, doesn't really matter from the server's perspective. You as a new person, it does matter. So the file server will read the PHP script whether or not the file association says .php, but for you as the new programmer, just put .php at the end so that you remember that it is a PHP script. So with that, let's go back out to the real world and have some final thoughts. So that's all there is to the class PHP syntax and errors. If you understand how PHP code should be written, then it makes life a lot easier as we go and we start doing more complicated things. Again, the biggest problem, the biggest thing that separates programmers from wannabe programmers is how many typos they make. Like I say, the reason why I'm an IT server systems guy is because I make a horrible amount of typos. If you made me write 5,000 lines of code, it would just be a mess. Not because I don't know what I'm supposed to do, not because I'm not intelligent, not because I don't understand how everything works, and so on and so on and so on. It's simply because I always forget to put in semicolons, and I always forget to close stuff, and close brackets, and close this, and close that. And therefore, when my code comes out, it's a complete mess. So if you can do this syntax, if you can write PHP properly, life will go very, very, very well for you. If you're like me, and you just can't remember to put a semicolon in, go off for your MCSE like I did. Really, that's about what there is to it. So remember, when we're talking about these PHP scripts, we are always going to be calling these PHP scripts from a web browser or through HTTP. So we're going to go with Google Chrome, Firefox, and so on. We will go to the web address of the PHP script, or a form that we create in HTML will call the PHP script. You can, but we're not going to get into it. You're not supposed to really call PHP scripts from a command line interface or from a cron job or anything like that. That's not what PHP is built for. PHP is built to interact with the web world. As I talked about a lot in the Linux class, what is very important once you start getting into this web programming is to remember, if you're dealing with a Linux web server, Linux cares about capitalization in file names. Uppercase T-E-S-T is a different file than lowercase t-e-s-t in the Linux world. So make sure you come up with some system for naming your files, because again, as we get more into PHP, as you're calling multiple scripts, as you're dumping into files and folders, if you make a mistake, in your code, you write capital T, lowercase est.php, and that's trying to call a script that's named lowercase test.php. Well, then it's not going to work. It's not going to function, and then you're going to get all frustrated, and if you're not thinking about it, you're not going to understand what's going on, because obviously you called test.php and you have test.php, so what's going on? Well, what's going on is that you did not call the correct file. I showed you how a basic PHP script works, and again, this is going to be the same whether you have 10 lines of code, 1 line of code, or 10,000 lines of code. You open the PHP script, angle bracket, question mark, PHP. That tells the web server everything that follows is PHP programming. Then you close it, question mark, angle bracket. So that says everything within that container. So we talk about that sometimes in web programming, containers. Everything in that container is a PHP script. You then give the command, as I showed you, print, and whatever you want done. Remember, commands get separated by semicolons. Semicolons are the equivalent of the period in the English language. So basically, you're saying print this, semicolon, then print this, semicolon, then print this, semicolon. If you don't put that semicolon there, PHP is going to think all of that is one horrible, long, nasty command, and it's probably just going to fail out because it won't work. The final thing with this is, remember, everything you open in PHP, you have to close in PHP. You open the PHP script, you close the PHP script. You open quotation marks to print, you close the quotation marks to print. When we get into functions, you open a function, you close a function. You have to open and you have to close. Everything that you open, close. It's just like a door. If you open the door, you got to close the door, just like your dad probably screamed at you, like me when I was a kid. Close the door! If you open the door, close the door. Anything you open, you got to close. It's simple, stupidly simple, but if you forget about it, like me, used to, then it can be very bad. I showed you the errors in this, so if you make a mistake, PHP will try to show you what line the mistake was on. So it will show you what file the error was in. So if you have multiple files, if you run a command and that triggers multiple files, it will tell you what file the error happened in, and then it will try to tell you what line the error happened on. The problem is, again, with this opening and closing, PHP will continue to read. So once you open something, it will continue to read until it sees a closing. So sometimes, as I showed you in this little example on the board, it will show you the error being on a different line. The reason is because you opened on one line and then it used a different quotation mark to close, and then the error seems to be on the other line. So be careful with that. Again, PHP tries to do a very good job. You know, so sometimes it just goofs up. It doesn't know how to help you with that. The big thing though, that's why I use Notepad++, is I mean, it has numbers on the left-hand side. You may think that's goofy and isn't that important, but again, once you start writing 100, 200,000 line programs, if you have an error on line 599, you don't want to have to put your cursor at the top and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Did I say 10? 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. It's horrible. So just, if nothing else, use Notepad++ simply because it has lines on the side. Then finally, as we talked about with formatting, be very careful. When you're reading text that was formatted for a text editor, it is going to look different than text that is edited for HTML. So again, if we have PHP and it writes hello world on two different lines, so hello on one line and world on the other, if you look at that in a web browser, it's going to put that on the same line. Why? Because HTML requires those HTML tags in order to know what's going on. So that's something, just keep that in mind. I see a lot of people struggle with PHP because especially with like this next line command that we're going to talk about later in this track, they don't understand. They use the next line, but then when they view it on their web page, it's all on the same line, and they get frustrated and try to rip out what little hair they have, and it's all really horrible. So this was the class, PHP syntax and errors. Try to go over the basic concepts for you again. All these seem simple, but they're going to be very, 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 very important as we go on. This is, another class in the PHP programming track. We're going to have a lot more of these classes, so stay tuned. As always, I'm Eli the Computer Guy over here for EliTheComputerGuy.com and EverymanIT.com. As always, I enjoy teaching this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one.